line joining us now. Again, great to have her with us back again in 2026. She is one of the best writers covering the game of golf for The Athletic and a contributor here to 5 Club. She is Gabby Herzig joining us this morning after returning from, I don't know how many balls she hit in the collective over her respite. Topping 1,000 maybe. Good morning.
You know, not quite, Gary. I wish we got up to that number, but it was a great little break for the holiday season, and I'm happy to be back with you.
Well, it's great to have you back on the heels of news that we thought was coming. Now, what we thought was some clarity as to what is the re-entry point for him, and then we'll get to potentially others. Let's start with this. I know you've been reporting on this for The Athletic. Give us your overall takeaway of the penalties that he is going to incur, the forfeiture of what he's not going to be eligible for. Take us through that first.
Yeah, Gary, it's an interesting way for the PGA Tour to structure this decision for sure in, making those penalties very much rested in the future, in future incurring payments that Brooks is not going to, reap the benefits of like other PGA Tour players who have stayed loyal to the PGA Tour have. And I think, that obviously points the PGA Tour's decision to provide some kind of incentive for Brooks to come back. I think, there is a way that this deal could have shaped out where it wouldn't really make sense for Brooks to take it. But I think this kind of walked the line of, enticing some of these stars to consider the deal while also appeasing the rest of the tour membership by providing a pretty strong penalty for the future. I do think we're going to hear opinions from PGA Tour players in the coming days that might, share that they think the penalties could be harsher. And I'm not totally in disagreement of that. I mean, Brooks defected from the tour. His move deeply impacted the PGA Tour's product for so many years. And now he's coming back to a tour where the purses are increased and the product is so much stronger because of, a move that he made and his peers made. I think it's going to be a very different story if someone like a Bryson DeChambeau or Jon Rahm makes that move and takes the decision. So it's definitely going to be an interesting couple of weeks, Gary, and I'm very curious to see what happens before that February 2nd date.
Yeah, no question. And we'll get to Bryson and Rahm and the other player. This small window, this very narrowly defined criteria as to who else is eligible. It's only 3 of them. In terms of insulating the current membership beyond what they think he should or should not be eligible for, or the severity of the penalties, how about his presence in tours? I think one thing that should be made abundantly clear is that let's say he makes his way into the FedEx Cup playoffs. It's like, well, he's pinching somebody else. No, he isn't, right?
Right, exactly. I think that was a really strong move by the PGA Tour. There could have been a lot of chatter about Brooks taking away a spot. I mean, even when Vijay Singh announced a couple weeks ago that he was going to use his career money exemption on the PGA Tour and was, quote unquote, taking away a spot from a younger player in some of these fields, people started to get a little antsy about that. So that is not the case at all for Brooks Koepka. And I think the PGA Tour made a really smart move by deciding to do that, expanding the fields, making an entire new membership category for this, quote unquote, Brooks Koepka rule. And I think that's one of the things that, new leadership like Brian Rolapp is really considering. They want to, make fans happy, but they also don't want to totally displease the players like some of the former moves of the previous PGA Tour administration might have rubbed some guys the wrong way. And I truly think that this decision this week and the swiftness in which it happened definitely was something that marks the new perspectives of Brian Rolapp's leadership and how he's he is aware of the past that's happened in the PGA Tour, but he's not wedded to the prior belief system that they were operating under before he came in.
Gabby, so he is ineligible for sponsor exemptions in signature series events, half of which don't have cuts. So there's a forfeiture because because of his profile, there's a reason why he's back here. He's a commodity. That some of those tournament directors would want to give him a spot. He's not eligible for any of those. The other part is he's not eligible for FedEx Cup bonus money as well. And in the regular events, all those events that he's in, him being added potentially actually adds more players to get to the proper number. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. They have to even out these fields. I mean, Brooks isn't going to be, registering for the WM Phoenix Open and playing alone. It's a really interesting model that they've created here. And I do think, one of the biggest storylines now this year is going to be, how does Brooks play in PGA Tour events? It's been a while since he's teed it up in 4-day competitive events with the cut. I mean, not to knock on Liv, but that's a totally different competitive model than he's seen for the majority of his playing in the past few years. And to have something to chase after, qualifying for the signature events purely based on his play and merit is going to be something worth watching. And I think he's probably back home in Florida practicing pretty good right now to make those appearances and, make people believe that he actually still has the competitive juices to compete on the PGA Tour, which I think is a valid question for people to be asking right now.
I think it is too, because he has one of the truly unique resumes in golf history. If you balance his major championship victories with his regular tour wins, there's no resume like it, truly. And I'm not including players who didn't play on the PGA Tour on a regular basis. I'm not including the likes of Seve Ballesteros, who dipped his toe in the water very, very briefly. I'm talking about somebody who year in and year out was playing 25 events on the PGA Tour and would win here and there, but would show up and be the biggest game hunter that we saw. Now, let me ask you about the player equity program. That $50 to $85 million, sometimes I know valuations can be like voodoo economics. What are you hearing about the plausibility that whether it's the low end, the high end, somewhere in the middle, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to estimate, Gary. It all depends on Brooks's performance throughout the season, and the player equity program is, those investments are meant to be long term, right? So he isn't going to receive any equity grants for the next 5 years, but as 2031 hits, if he's still competing on the PGA Tour, he's going to start reaping those benefits of being a PGA Tour member and improving the product. So, I think the conversation is really around what exactly is the penalty that Brooks is paying. He had to make a $5 million charitable donation alongside the PGA Tour. That's really the upfront payment that Brooks is incurring to play on the PGA Tour, to compete on the PGA Tour. The rest of all of this is very much hypothetical, depending on how Brooks performs and what kind of investments he would hypothetically be able to be granted as a PGA Tour member. So I think that's kind of where the frustration might be coming from some of these guys, is that the upfront penalty maybe wasn't enough or wasn't strict enough for those future payments. Like, one sentiment I've heard tossed around is maybe he shouldn't be able to ever have equity in the PGA Tour after doing what he did and defecting to Live. So, it's an interesting conversation, and I'm curious to see, what Bryson DeChambeau, Jon Rahm, Cam Smith, if they come out with statements about those penalties and what they think about, the structure that the PGA Tour has set out right now. And I'm curious to see what they have to say.
Yeah, let's get to those three, because now with the clock ticking, and it's not like, there's a lot of sand in the hourglass. There's not. The deadline is February 2nd, which, by the way, that's 2 days before the start of Liv's first event of the 2026 season in Saudi Arabia. So it's 22 to 25. You immediately go, okay, who are those players? It's Cam Smith, it's Bryson DeChambeau, and it's Jon Rahm. Let's talk about the plausibility from ascending to descending order. Are any of them, as you look at these three, do you center on one of them that there is even a remote possibility that this would happen?
I really can't tell at this current moment, Gary, but I mean, I think the most interesting one to me would definitely be Bryson DeChambeau, because he truly is the needle on Live right now. And I know he was talking earlier this year about the process of renegotiating his contract. There were some comments tossed around about, what if I just ditch it all and just play YouTube golf? He seriously has the power right now, especially now that the PGA Tour has handed him this option. So, someone like Bryson could effectively, shut down some of Liv's biggest draws. The crowds that appear in person at Live golf tournaments, a lot of them are there just to see Bryson. And I truly think he would be damaging the product by, even considering this option. if he decides to stay, I also think that would be a pretty big win for Live Golf. So it is going to be a very interesting next couple of weeks. I'm curious if we'll hear anything from Bryson himself, or it will be speculation until that date comes. But to me, he's the most interesting in terms of the longevity of the product, both the PGA Tour product and the Live Golf product, because whatever he decides to do, it's going to have a massive impact. And Jon Rahm is interesting too. Obviously, he has a little bit of a pickle right now with how the Ryder Cup situation is shaking out his eligibility. And I think an avenue to the PGA Tour and not having to worry about what happens in the arbitration cases in the UK is a serious potential draw for Jon Rahm. And then Cam Smith, I feel like offering the olive branch to Cam Smith, he kind of was just potentially looped in with those exemption categories that the PGA Tour drew out for this program, which is interesting because Cam Smith has really not been informed for several years now, despite being such an accomplished player, in the years where he was winning a lot and performing well. So it's truly a mind-boggling mix right now. And I'm, like I said earlier, very curious to see what we hear in the coming weeks.
Yeah, when Cam left, though, it was really on the heels, having won the Players, having won the Open Championship. He was so hot. There was inarguably one of the best players in the world, and then the indifference of his performance, and then you couple that with the major championship performances when people have been more aware, I think at large, of him playing have also been uninspiring as well. I want to read one thing to you. Last thing. Brian Rolapp said, quote, "This is a one-time defined window, and it's not a precedent for future situations. Once this door closes, there's no promise that this path will be available again." What do you make of that?
It's putting the pressure on, Gary. I mean, this is truly the PGA Tour, operating for the first time in a while on the offense and offering these guys this one-time window and truly some time pressure, and the clock is ticking for them to make a decision. And I think it just represents the kind of new era that the PGA Tour is in, being in a place where they can operate out of strength and not, catering to every move that Liv makes, every player that threatens to defect. They truly have some leverage here now in offering this path. And I think that's a promising sign for PGA Tour fans in how, Brian Rolapp is going to operate in the coming years with, inheriting all of this. And that's how I read it. And I do think, despite the uniqueness of the situation, it was a really smart move by the PGA Tour. Also, for another reason, which I feel like has been a little bit overlooked in this discussion, is kind of eliminating any antitrust concerns now with allowing Live players to come back to the tour, not offering lifetime bans anymore, is definitely something that I'm sure they considered behind the scenes from a legal perspective. So again, just a smart move by the PGA Tour all around, creating that pressure to offer that pathway to these three guys.
Thank you as always. It's great to have you back. Good to see your face. Looking forward to a lot of your input, your very smart input all year long. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Gary. I appreciate it.